Yesterday on the podcast, we spoke about the be your own boss myth, how it's very popular in entrepreneurial circles, and how people assume that if you're your own boss, you have total autonomy, and because of that, it means you're totally free. But they forget that the fact that you're totally autonomous now means that you have to exercise extreme responsibility over your your finances and your other responsibilities, and that this whole thing about being free is pretty much just a myth, because once you are the business owner and you're responsible for everything, you really have to deal with the vagaries of life and business hard on, and you have to deal with all these external circumstances that you have no control over. So contrary to what people say, being your own boss is not as freeing as people think. So, of course, eventually, over the long term, you make a little bit more money. You set up stable business systems and checks and balances, and yes, you'll be able to get some level of autonomy. Sorry, some level of freedom. Let me put it that way, since freedom is what it is that is in issue. So, eventually, yes, but in the beginning, no. So, today, continuing in that vein, I'd like to explore another restriction on this idea of being free once you launch into business as your own boss. So you think you're good with the camera, you pick up a camera, you want to be a wedding photographer, you're good with people, you're good with project management, maybe because that's what you studied in school. And so you think because of that you can be a good wedding planner. And so you decide to be your own boss. But are you truly free? Maybe. But if you consider one thing, and that is the idea of market validation. That is what one of the things that I talk about repeatedly on the podcast. Now, what is the idea of market validation? Market validation basically just means that you have an idea for a product or a service, or you have an idea for some kind of value bundle. You have to put it out to the market, and the market has to say, oh yes, I agree, this thing is valuable, and we are going to buy it. And so that's the idea of market validation. Because you take products, you put them out into the market, and if the market doesn't validate them, then there is not a need for that, and then you have to fold. Now, one popular example, okay, maybe not popular, because I think it's only those of us who are children of journalists in the 80s who can relate. So growing up as children in a TV household, the rest of you might not be aware of this, but VHS, the popular cassette tapes that we used to watch movies on. If there are any of you listening to this podcast who are younger than 40, or let's say maybe 30, you might not understand what it is that I'm talking about. So you might have to use Google to see what a VHS is. So while VHS was becoming a thing in the rest of the world back in the late 70s and early 80s, VHS wasn't the only video format that was around at the time. It wasn't the only analog format for putting video on tape. There was another one called Betamax. Now, VHS and Betamax, I think, are more like brand names, so I'm not sure what the underlying technology is, the underlying distinction, because remember, back then I was a kid. So all I just know was that Betamax was the technically superior format, and then VHS was kind of the one that was everywhere. So because my father and my mom were media professionals at the time, they worked with the Nigerian Television Authority, that's NTA. They both started their career out of Suleja and then eventually to Abuja. Back when Abuja was a young city, we moved to Abuja, I think, in 1984. So so those of us who were the children of the NTA staff, we knew that there's not just VHS, there's VHS and Betamax is the better, much more superior format. But in the battle for market validation, only one format won out, and that was VHS. And so, for those of you who even remember what analog tapes were, if you didn't grow up in media families like some of us did, then you only knew VHS. And that was because for when it came to the battle of market validation, it was only one format that won out at the end of the day. So the technically superior format was VHS, Betamax. But the thing is, production execs, people who worked in the newsroom, things like that, they knew that it was technically superior. And my father did buy things on Betamax for as long as he could, but at the end of the day, it was VHS that won the battle for market validation, and so VHS was a thing and reigned supreme for several decades until the advent of digital and CDs and DVDs and Blu-ray and all of that. Now, for those of you who are maybe 15 or so listening to the podcast, 15, 20, you might know what a DVD is, so it's something that you're going to have to Google. So just think of that as a cool history lesson. Google VHS, Google DVDs, Google CDs. Interesting bits of technology that we used to use before everything went 100% online and 100% digital. So, the summary of that whole story, Betamax versus VHS, is just to show that your ideas have to be tested by the market, your product has to be tested by the market, and that is what determines whether it is that you're going forward or not. Now, please don't bring up the issue of the iPhone here. I've spoken about it on different episodes, and so I'm not going to address that here, because the iPhone, some people point to the iPhone and say that this is about manufacturing something that was new, but it's still the same. It still had to go through the process of market validation. We had to validate the market. Will people buy this thing that we have created, that we have invented? So if you look at it in that sense, we do have some restrictions on our freedom because we all have to pass through market validation. So I can say that I am the best photographer in the world, and I think black and white is the ultimate classy way for photographs to be taken. And I put it out there in the world, and I call myself Black and White Photography Limited, because that's what I want to do, and that is me being authentic and living my best life. But if it doesn't go through market validation, then it's not going to fly. If the market says, no, we're not with you on this black and white thing, then unfortunately your business is going to have to fold, or you're going to have to try harder to redefine the value proposition, look for your target market, and give it another go. But bottom line is, when we get into business for ourselves as wedding planners, photographers, makeup artists, whatever, in the event space, we are not totally free. The market is our boss, and it is market validation that determines whether this business idea and ultimately whether we are going to survive or not, which is the reason why you find a lot of people pivoting. There's some people who come into this wedding event space and who want to keep it clean and candid like I do, but then they buckle under the weight of everybody else who wants Photoshop and exaggerated editing. And it's the same thing with decor people. You come in with your own ideas about what you think is sophisticated and glamorous, and maybe you try to keep things nice and simple. Maybe you use lots of clean lines and lots of silver. But if you get to the Abuja market, and Abuja and Kano people are gold and bold designs and exaggerated features, then maybe you have to blend, or maybe you don't. Anyway, bottom line, what I'm just trying to say is, once you become your own boss and you decide to be free, you're not totally free. You have another boss, and that is market validation. So while you worked at Zenith Bank, you were upset with Oga Kunle or Oga Kemi, who was your boss, because you thought that they were, you thought that they were a hassle to deal with. But once you become your own boss, you're just substituting one hassle for another set of hassles. So once you're done with Oga Kunle and Auntie Kemi or Oga Kemi, you now have to deal with market validation. So how do you trump market validation? How do you succeed? How do you overcome? Those are parts of the things that we talk about over on the podcast and any other good business podcast that you happen to be listening to. So let me just wrap it up here. And that's it for today, showing another way that our freedom is circumscribed when we decide to go to business, into business for ourselves. But remember, it's not all doom and gloom. We can prevail, and those are the things that we discuss about over on the podcast. So thank you very much for listening to the Sales for the Nigerian Wedding Industry podcast. I'm your host, Abuja-based event and wedding photographer Navishima Ayede. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And for those of you who reach out over on the Instagram handle, the Sales Conversations Instagram handle, I'd like to thank you guys as well. I did a reel yesterday which amassed 3,600 and something views, and that was really mind-boggling for me, because I don't get that kind of traffic over here on the podcast, at least not on a daily basis. Anyway, so for those of you who engage on the Instagram handle and who like, share, and recommend to your friends, thank you very much for that as well, because you're helping out to grow the reach of this gospel that we preach and bringing salvation to other people so that they realize that poverty and penury and sadness doesn't exactly have to be their portion, that there is another way about how we can grow our businesses and our revenue. So thank you very much for listening. I'll catch you guys at the next recording.